We get started. Looks like we have almost a full house of over 45 people on this call. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We hope you are all well and staying safe during these difficult times for all of us. My name is Ron Jasser, and I'm the president of the Lend a Hand Project, and I want to welcome you all to our speaker series of fundraising events. Tonight, we are pleased to present an evening with Merrill Ain, author of The Takeaway Man, and moderated by our executive director, Lisa Pollack. Those of you who really don't know of the Lend a Hand Project, we are a nonprofit 501c3 organization founded in 1998 in response to the growing number of families and individuals living below the poverty line right here in Suffolk and Nassau County on Long Island. We are proud to say that we now serve over 1,000 recipients through our sponsor program. It's people like you with your donations this evening that help us make a difference in those people's lives. If any of you would be interested in becoming a sustaining donor or sponsor, please contact Lisa or Ellen Acosta, our caseworker, at our Comac office for more information. And I thank you for that. So, without any further ado, and I can be long-winded, sit back and enjoy an evening with Merrill and Lisa. Thank you. Ladies, it's all yours.
Thank you, Ron. I'd like to start by offering a bit of background on Dr. Merrill Ain. Merrill Ain's articles and essays have appeared in Huffington Post, the New York Jewish Week, the New York Times, Newsday, and other publications. In 2014, she co-authored the award-winning book, The Living Memories Project, Legacies at Last. And in 2016, wrote a companion workbook, My Living Memories Project Journal. She is a sought-after speaker and has been interviewed on television, radio, and podcasts. Merrill is a career educator and is proud to be both a teacher and student of history. She's also worked as a school administrator. The Takeaway Man is the result of her lifelong quest to learn more about the Holocaust, a thirst that was first triggered by reading the Diary of Anne Frank in 6th grade. Merrill has an expertise in Holocaust education and a fascination with the Julius and Ethel Rosenberg case. Merrill holds a BA from Queens College, an MA from Teachers College, Columbia University, and an EDD from Hofstra University. Hi, my name's Lisa Pollack. As the daughter of a Holocaust survivor, I'm especially pleased to have the honor of interviewing Merrill this evening. I've just taken over at Lend a Hand Project, and part of my learning curve has been to learn more about the people that we serve. I've come to realize quickly that there's no one shape or size for a person in need. Need comes in many forms and can develop from an infinite number of circumstances. This awareness in this moment has filled considerable space in my brain and has caused me to read The Takeaway Men from a very different lens than I might have just a few short months ago. I found myself analyzing many of the characters based upon their personal complexities, vulnerabilities, and layers of hardship, which of course are critical aspects of their identities. It was fascinating for me to note that many of the identities are similar to those of our Lend a Hand recipients today. The times are different, but many of the challenges remain the same, including being poor, an immigrant, a war veteran, unemployed, a victim of trauma, suffering from mental illness, managing bereavement or loss, feeling displaced, lonely, unloved, unwelcomed. Ellen, when you wrote the book, were you of a mind that these challenges were unique to the post-Holocaust period?
I don't think that they were unique to the post-Holocaust period. But I definitely wanted to tell that story because I think in the mind of the public, especially at the time and even now, maybe not so much now, you know, the war was over. 6 million Jews were killed, 5 million others, some survived, and then they went to other countries. They went to America or Israel or Canada, and for many people, that's the end of the story. And in doing research and talking and interviewing survivors and children of survivors, I learned that that really was the beginning of the story, and that trauma lives with them to this day. I also, when I was writing the book, saw parallels with what is going on today, particularly the title, The Takeaway Men. Obviously, it referred to a few things in the book, including the Gestapo, but it can also relate to children being separated from their parents on the southern border today, and the plight of migrants.
So you almost answered my next question, which was, did you intend for the book to be a Holocaust book?
I intended for the book to be a post-Holocaust book. I did not want to get into a lot of description of the Holocaust. There is some, but I really wanted to tell the story of what happened after, because there are many books and many novels about the Holocaust. In fact, it is the best-selling category on Amazon, but there are really only a few books about the post-Holocaust period. So I wanted to tell that story, but at the same time, I think that it is a cautionary tale for today.
So leading up to that, did you mean to showcase either the vulnerability or kindness of people in society, or perhaps both?
I definitely wanted to showcase both. And the thing that I really wanted to do, besides showing what happened to these survivors and their children, was I wanted to raise important questions that I think had to do with the Holocaust. But they're timely questions now, but they're also timeless questions. They're right for any age, and I think they're particularly relevant now. So it really was something that I wanted the reader to think about. What is our responsibility to other human beings? What do we do when we see evil in the world, when we see people who are hurting, when we see people who are hungry? What do we do? Do we turn do we turn our heads? Do we watch? Do we throw things at them? Do we discriminate against them? Or do we help them? And I think that this is, very appropriate to the mission of Lend a Hand, because obviously this organization is dedicated to helping people. So I know that the board and the active members are committed to lending a hand. But I think it's a very important question that all of society should be asking at this moment in history. What is our responsibility to others? And particularly, what is our responsibility to people who are different from us?
Interesting. So for me, it was a study of vulnerability. At the moment, perhaps because of my new affiliation with Lend a Hand, I'm profoundly aware of just how vulnerable each of us are. We come to the world with different sensitivities, even as twins, and navigate our lives accordingly. Many of us, especially now, encountering unimaginable hardships, particularly with the onset and continuation of COVID. Not everyone can stand on their own, and throughout life may need to ask others for help. As in The Takeaway Men, help can come in many forms. Acts of kindness spilled all over the book. I'd love for you to describe us the framework of kindness that you laid out in the book.
Well, I will take it there might be other examples, but I'll just take it from two vantage points. So one is this story of person who becomes Judy. That's not her name throughout the book, but she's Judy. And when we start out the book, she is a Polish Catholic woman who decides that she's going to help save Jews. So she mainly rescues children from the ghetto, and she puts them in convents, and she puts the younger ones with family. And then later, she goes on to save adults, including her to-be husband. The other example of kindness would be the distant cousins of the immigrant family, who open their home and their hearts to them as soon as they find out that they have relatives who survived the Holocaust. They did not know them. They knew the parents and the grandparents, and they open up their home. They take the couple and their two daughters in. They give the father a job in the bakery, and they really embrace them. They teach them about America, and it really, and there really was a good deal of that at that time, that people found relatives and they stayed with the relatives for a time till they could get on their feet.
What role did community play in the book? It's partially what you talked about, but I think it goes beyond that. Do you believe that community could play a similar role today?
Well, I think we're very polarized today, so it depends on, what communities we're talking about. Certainly within, religious communities or interest communities. But I think of, one of the beauties of Lend a Hand is that it really reaches out to all people. It's not just, people who are of the same religion or race or background as we are. So I think that we need more community today. We really need more people to care about one another. That's definitely so. But it wasn't, there were relatives who stepped up to the plate, and of course Hayes helped the survivors leave the country and get settled. But the overall community, I think, was kind of, in general, this is generalization, clueless about these refugees. It wasn't really spoken about much, and it was sort of just not, I don't think people in general embraced them as much as they could have.
So stepping back a little from community to more personal stuff, I'm fascinated by both the simple and complex relationships that unfold in the book. Relationships are, of course, critical to how we view the world. Those included the non-immediate family members that you spoke about, Faye and Izzy, with Judy and Aaron and their children, the spouses, Judy and Aaron, Faye and Izzy, Jenny and Harry, Irv and Connie. I feel like they're my family.
You got them all.
Jacob and Ava, we can't forget them. The twins, Bronca and Jojo, the community on 253rd Street, the dynamics in the synagogue, Lenore's relationship with her men. Which were your favorite relationships to develop?
Well, it's like asking a mother who her favorite child is. I enjoy them all. I like them all. But I particularly enjoyed the story of Lenore, because Lenore was really a woman who was ahead of her time. She was frustrated. She could have been running a company, but she was kind of looked down upon because she wasn't married. And she had a child, and she defined herself by the men in her life, and I really thought that sh I enjoyed doing her.
So I can't lie, I love the twins, Jojo and Bronca.
I love them too.
What I thought was so nuanced and sophisticated was that you didn't only focus on the obvious of physical attributes, talents, and demeanor, which are often different among fraternal twins, but what was also different was, and was so beautifully expanded upon, were their capacity for compassion, their emotional intelligence, their sensitivity, their fundamental values, and they were different. Again, products of the same environment, but different. You did that so beautifully.
Thank you.
Now, let's talk a little bit about the otherness. You mentioned it a little bit earlier. There are many instances of otherness in the book. Two that hit me hard were when characters experienced otherness in the context of faith. To me, I think of faith as the ultimate embrace. And yet, Izzy's daughter-in-law, Patty, and Aaron's wife, Judy, they're made to feel like the other. Could you tell us more about those experiences and what you were hoping to convey by them?
I wanted to raise another important question, which I wanted my readers to ponder. And it's a question that to this day still hasn't been resolved by the Jewish community. And that is the question of who is a Jew. And was Judy a good Jew? Was she not a Jew because she wasn't technically a Jew? I mean, these are issues that are still being hotly debated in Israel. They're still not being resolved among the different denominations. And, Izzy, I think, says it best when he said, we just had a war and 6 million Jews were killed. Why are we being so exclusive? You would think we should want more Jews and not fewer Jews. So I think that's just an important question. It's been a question for more than 30 years at least among the denominations, and it never gets settled. And I thought that maybe people would discuss it if they read the book.
I hope they do, that's for sure. I also felt disappointment when the Hebrew school principal made Maura Cohen feel like an other by how he treated and disrespected her. My idealistic self would have hoped that he would embrace her and the legacy that she was trying to teach the students. What does his behavior tell us about him as a person, the synagogue, the community, and the sentiments of the time, I suppose?
Well, first, let me start with the time. During that time, there was no such word as Holocaust. That came 20 years later. The Holocaust was not discussed in schools, at least. I mean, it was just about the time of the Diary of Anne Frank, and then later with the Eichmann trial, when Eichmann was captured in 1960, and then the trial was 1961, and it was broadcast on WABC for 15 minutes a day. I think people became a little more sensitive to the issue, but there was very little talk about it at the time. And it was just so interesting to me in doing my research that the minute the war was over, the government really forgot about Nazis. In fact, the US government invited 1,000 Nazis to come to this country to work in the nuclear program and in the space program. So people really weren't talking about the Holocaust. They weren't talking about Nazis. It was all about communists and the Red Scare and the nuclear bomb, and kids had to duck under their desks in school. So it really it was not really on the forefront of people's minds at the time.
Did you want to say anything about him personally or about the
About
community?
him,
How
yeah.
that was.
So about him personally, yeah. So I think, you know, uh, he didn't want the parents to get all upset that, you know, he thought it was taking away from the parents' prerogative. I personally think that he was a male chauvinist, and he treated Mrs. Cohn poorly because she was a woman and because she was what they used to call a refugee. I don't know that he would have treated a man or someone who didn't have an accent that way. So I think that was just a sign of the times. And, you know, with the loss of Ruth Bader Ginsburg in the last few days, we often forget what it was like for women way back when. They were not equals at all in any shape or form.
Query whether they are today, but that's subject of
Well,
another talk.
it was a lot worse then.
Absolutely. Now back in terms of otherness, to my mind, Aaron is the most often the character that's depicted as the other, whether it's by virtue of his distinct accent, his lack of attention to his appearance, his lack of ability to dress or act American, his lack of assimilation skills. Do you attribute his otherness to his status as an immigrant or his personality, or are there other factors that you meant to be demonstrated here?
Well, I think we cannot underestimate, first of all, that he was a son of privilege. He lived in a big stone house. His father was a doctor. They had servants. He expected to be. He was a grandson of a prominent rabbi. He expected to grow up into a life of privilege. So just think about, we don't think about how young he really was at the time. His whole life, all his plans were taken away from him. So that was a big burden. Then, of course, if you finish the book, you know that he had some other tragic things happen to him. But I would say also that he suffered from depression, which I don't think was identified or treated in those days. I don't think that the refugees were sent to counseling automatically, and he was suffering from PTSD, and I don't think he ever got over that, and he passed it along to his children.
So both now and in the book, you use the words immigrant and refugee often. Do they mean the same thing to you?
Well, a refugee can be an immigrant. An immigrant is not necessarily a refugee. An immigrant can be a person who's well off and just decides to go to another country and become a citizen there. There are many Americans, for instance, who decide to make Aliyah and they go to Israel. They're not necessarily refugees. Refugee connotes that you're escaping hardship.
Interesting distinction. Do you think that this feeling of otherness and status as a refugee impacted the decisions of, for instance, Judy and Aaron, Jacob and Eva, in how they raised their children and how their children behaved as they were growing up?
Yes, I do. I think that, their desire to either keep the secret or tell the secret had a tremendous impact on the children. I think the trauma that they experienced certainly must have impacted their child rearing. And I think that they must have really struggled with how are they going to protect their children? But yet they knew, because they had just come from a situation where parents couldn't protect children. So how scary is that? And I think that colored their lives.
So I'm fascinated with Becky. Let's turn to her for a moment. She drops into the story seemingly from nowhere after a lot of the foundation is already laid, and manages to have a significant impact on the story and on the characters. What can we learn from her on a personal level? And what lessons can we take away from her on a more community or societal level?
Well, I think the bigger lesson from Becky is that, and this is true, I've read of people today, you know, many people who are homeless suffer from mental illness, and that's the reason that many of them are homeless. I think we've got to take, and I think we do, take it more seriously than we did then. I mean, then it was a big secret, and people did not speak about it. So the other thing is that she is another symbol of otherness. And as a matter of fact, I mention in the book that before Hitler ever gassed the Jews, he experimented on German psychiatric patients. So, you know, how do we treat people who have mental illness is a big question. And we should also keep in mind that many people who are struggling and are in poverty and homeless may have mental issues as well that need to be addressed.
True. I know from my own life that mental illness not only affects the person suffering, but also the family. How do you believe that Becky's illness affected the twins?
Well, it's very clear that JoJo, as she got older, was really very embarrassed by her. She felt that she was cramping her style. She didn't want her friends to come over. She was already embarrassed by her father's accent and her father's clothes. And she just felt that she was spoiling everything for her. And she really begged her mother to move out of the house. Bronca, on the other hand, took her cue, I guess, from her mother and to a lesser extent from Faye. And she thought if she'd only give Becky enough love and care, she would get better. And that doesn't work either. So.
True. In terms of government and politics, I can't resist going there. I realize it's a touchy subject, and I'm not sure if that's where my sensitivity to that aspect of the book comes from, but I'm wondering how much of the story and the way people behave is impacted by the politics and government pressures of the time. To what extent was the fear of communism an influence on how the matter of the Holocaust and its survivors, do you suppose, were treated in the United States?
I'm really not sure about that. I know that Jews in general got blamed for being communists, because there were many Jews who joined the Communist Party when they were in college in the 1930s. And in the public mind, and Jews and communists, they went hand in hand. It's interesting to note that in the Rosenberg case, the judge and all the lawyers were Jewish, but they wanted to be seen as the good Jews. So I think that there were people like Izzy, and Aaron by extension, he was just kind of thinking what Izzy thought that this was an anti-Semitic act, especially to execute the Rosenbergs, because no spies had ever been executed during peacetime before. So I think that that was, that was definitely looking at from the point of view of Jews. But I think that there were many Jews who just didn't want any part of it. And, you saw in the McCarthy hearings, there were people who told on others and people who didn't. And as you said, it was, and as the rabbi says in the book, it was very nasty politics of the time, and it does affect people's behavior. And there are people who want to save their own skin, and there are always people who stand up and try to do what's right.
And there was a lot of both that we saw in the story. It's interesting. Do you view the story of these characters as a testament to the goodness of America and what we stand for, or a criticism of our structure, or maybe both?
No, I don't see it as a criticism of America. I still think, I do think we are, and that's all I'm going to say, undergoing very nasty politics at this time. But I think the promise of America, the idea of America, is a beautiful thing. I start out the book with a quote from Emma Lazarus: "We are not free. None of us is free until we are all free." And I think that that is what we are striving for. That is why it says in the Constitution, in order to form a more perfect union, we know that we're not perfect. So I like to hold out hope in the ideals and the promise of America, as sometimes it doesn't look good, but I still believe it's there as the foundation.
So Lenore's arrest was a significant event for Aaron immediately when he got to America. How did it reflect upon the government and politics of the time, and what impact did that have on Aaron's sense of personal safety?
Well, as I said, the time was that, people were looking for communists under every chair. People were very, very frightened, and people told on other people in order to save themselves. So it was a very backbiting kind of a time. But when Aaron first sees, and he doesn't even know they're FBI, but they look very official with the hats and the suits and the big black cars, he just says to himself, is this happening here? This looks like what happened in Poland, where the Gestapo came and took people away. And this woman is the same age as my wife. And what are they doing? Why are they taking her away? And he gets very frightened, and it evokes his own experience. But as we know, it didn't last forever, and it passed.
But he carried it with him. I don't know that he ever
carried it
let
with
it
him.
go.
I'm talking about the country in general, but he carried that fear with him, and he passed it along to his at least one of his daughters.
True. So many would say that the Holocaust and the Kel's pogrom, which were central to the story, they were the product of government and politics. What do you think they can teach us for today?
Never forget.
Well, I think that they teach us that we have to think for ourselves, and we have to speak out, and we have to take action when we see evil, when we see other people being harmed. That demagogues sometimes are very clever in manipulating the public, and you have to be able to see through it. And there's you can't just go along with it. Hitler was voted into power.
So sorry.
No, go ahead.
On the flip side of that, what can we learn about social change?
Well, I think that people make it happen. But I think that sometimes it takes longer than than we would like. So I think we're in a period now of social change, whether we want to acknowledge it or not.
The war ended, but they still have this.
But yeah, go on.
Go ahead.
So you go on.
No, I'm just saying that, you know, when you look at the Kielce pogrom, which took place a year after the war was over, and they killed 42 Jews and injured 44 others in cold blood, and these were soldiers and police and citizens 1 year after the war was over in Europe. The Holocaust was over by that point. You know, it just really makes you wonder. So what could have been different there? More people could have taken action. People could have stopped, you know, the bad guys from doing it, but the bad guys were the police and the soldiers. So it's a conundrum.
So I found the statement of the sergeant where he talked about the world and America not wanting to really address the Holocaust and the survivors, that they were busy dealing with communism. I found that so interesting because he mentioned that as of that time, which was the 50s, of course, only 24 people had been held accountable for the 6 million deaths. I never thought of it that way. But the fact that he mentioned that was, wow. Like, how can we as a society reconcile that statistic?
Well, there just simply was no taste for it after the war. And again, the Allies were very happy to have Stalin and the Russians help them win the war, but they never really trusted him. And once they saw, what was happening with the Iron Curtain afterwards, they really didn't trust him, and they just didn't talk about Nazis anymore for a very long time. I mean, Simon Wiesenthal was doing his thing in Europe, but in the United States, there was nothing going on during that time. There were many Nazis living in plain sight, and nobody did anything about it.
So from my time working with Holocaust survivors, one of the things that I was shocked about is up until today, there have been some efforts to find Nazis, but up until today, there are so many challenges in actually finding them and prosecuting them, even if we do find them. To me, that's astounding.
Well, there have been some. There have been some. It's very hard. With like how do you say? Demyanyak. It's very hard. It's very hard to prove. And of course, there really aren't that many Nazis left anymore.
14.
Unfortunately, or fortunately, or unfortunately. So, do you perceive the book to be about despair or about hope?
Wow. Well, I'm hopeful, so I'll say it's about hope. Look, people are complicated. People have mixed feelings, but it's about survival. It's about the difficulties of survival. But I think it's hopeful.
And I assume that means you'd like your readers to walk away from reading it feeling hopeful?
I hope so.
I did.
Okay.
How much do you believe that the story is tied to the Holocaust specifically? And how much do you suppose a version of the story could happen today? And what might that look like?
Well, I think that I think the Holocaust itself is sui generis. We've had other genocides and other terrible things happening in the world, but I think that throwing the weight of the government with the technology and the manpower behind it. I really think with such precision, I have to believe that that is a case unto itself. However, as we all know, unfortunately, there have been genocides. The persecution goes on as we speak. People are discriminated against for being different, and we can certainly take any group. We can take migrants from Latin America and talk about the difficulties that that they have. So I think that I think the idea that people bring their culture with them, and there's just such a tendency for many people to just look at them as different. They speak a different language, they have different customs, they're poor. But you're talking about the promise of America. The promise of America is that in a couple of generations, they can be a Supreme Court justice. So I think it's hopeful. I hope that we still have the promise of America. I believe that we do, but we can basically say it about any immigrant group. And unfortunately, groups that really are not immigrants also, people of color.
So you covered a lot of ground in the story, and then it ended. So my question for you is, did you realize that by ending the story where you did, you were leaving the reader wanting more? Like, oh my, like what's next?
Well, to be honest, I really, the book that I intended to write was going to go well into the 60s and probably into the 70s and beyond. And as I wrote each chapter, I shared it with my husband, Stuart. And when I got to what became the end, he said to me, "All right, this is the end. the book is over." And I thought he was right. But what's happened now is that people are asking me for more, and they do want a sequel. So I'm considering that.
I hope so. What made you place the story on 253rd Street in Belrose, Queens?
Oh, okay. Well, okay.
Readers.
That's a good question. If there is anybody from Belrose out here and you want to get in touch with me, I'm on Facebook. You can go to my website and email me. My website is merylane.com. I'm hearing from a lot of people from my past, and it really is very gratifying. So the two big decisions I had to make, I had to decide where the immigrants were coming from, where the family was coming from. And as we discussed, because of the Kells pogrom, I had them coming from Kells. And that involved doing a tremendous amount of research, because honestly, I had never really heard or read about the Kells pogrom until Stuart and I saw a documentary about it several years ago. And then I had to decide where they were going to go. And one of the advice they give you is write what you know. So I'm a big fan of Philip Roth, and Philip Roth sets everything in New Jersey and almost everything in Newark, which is where he grew up. So I decided that I would set it in Belrose, where I grew up.
And I grew up about 50 blocks from there on 195th Street, not 253rd Street. So I knew all about Dan Supreme and the stores and the bakery. So I'm one of those people, although I didn't know you at the time. I'm one of those people fascinated with the neighborhood, and I'm from there.
Well, what's interesting. I lived off Union Turnpike, and I lived actually on 251st Street. And there was no 253rd Street right off Union Turnpike. So I said, okay, I'll make it 253rd Street, because I didn't want to make it an actual street. And then I spoke to a friend who grew up in Little Neck. She said, no, there was a 253rd Street. And then somebody else said, no, there was also a 253rd Street on the other side of Hillside Avenue. So, but there was none on Union Turnpike.
One of the things that's interesting in terms of the story itself and in terms of modern times, the notion of not only the psyche of an immigrant, but the psyche of the next generation. You know, of course, about all the 2G people, which are second generation Holocaust survivors like myself. There's many of us running around, and there's second gens of many immigrant groups. What are you learning? I know you're a student of history much more than I am. What are you learning about history and how that affects the psyche of society, of communities?
Yeah, well, I wanted to tell their story because their story really hadn't been told much, and that was why I chose to have twins, because in all the second gen people I've known and those I've interviewed, I found that there's really a big disparity in how they assimilate their background and experience. So we had Bronca, who was haunted and kind of embraced the legacy, and JoJo, who just wanted to be an American girl and wanted to run as far away from it as she possibly could. And I really should say right here, I don't think I've said it, is that I am not the child of Holocaust survivors. In fact, two of my grandparents were born here, and both of my parents were in the United States Army during World War II. But one of the things I was the most gratified was then when I gave the book to my 2G friends to read, they said, you know, you got it right, because you can't paint us with one stroke. There's the two, and there's a lot in between. So I wanted to show that, and also with the survivors, that some talked about it all the time and some never said a word.
In terms of what we're going through now with COVID and the challenges of our times now, can you imagine the story playing out and relating to what the challenges that we confront now, which are different challenges, but just as the people in the book were challenged by their circumstance, today we as a society are challenged? Are there any parallels that you can think of?
Well, I think there are parallels. I think that the parallels are, I would hesitate to make parallels because I don't really think you can, you're talking about parallels with the Holocaust or parallels with the post-Holocaust period?
With the Holocaust, because
with the Holocaust, I don't really think that you can. I think that, yeah, we may be locked in our houses, but we have electricity and heat and running water and food and TV and computers and Zoom. It's difficult. I know that people are getting depressed, and it's tough. I think it's incredibly tough for people with young children to, you know, with the whole school issue, and are they in school or are they home Zooming? But I think this is a difficult time, but I know that it will pass, and I don't know that they really knew that they would survive. I mean, of course, you know, we have to be careful and, you know, try not to get sick, but I don't really see parallels.
a week ago or 10 days ago, a statistic came out that was really alarming. Well, alarming to me. I don't want to judge. An alarming statistic came out about the number of people, and particularly millennials, I believe, who don't know about the Holocaust, have never heard of it even. I was wondering if you saw that statistic.
I did. I read that. I read that piece, and I have to say that, I didn't mention that before, but that was really one of my motivations also in telling this story. And as much as I've gotten very good feedback from adults, it's also been suggested to me that perhaps, high school students could read the book and get some background about the Holocaust and the post-war period from it. I think it's critically important to remember. There are every day, the number of Holocaust survivors is dwindling, and soon there will be no survivors to tell the stories themselves. So I know that the second generation has taken it upon themselves to tell the story, but we need to tell the story because, when you think, how could this have happened, in Germany, which was supposedly one of the most cultured places on earth, and it happened. And it shows that human beings, when they're suffering, when they have economic problems, are always looking for a scapegoat. And, the Jews were the scapegoat then. Sometimes the Jews are the scapegoats. Sometimes Black people are the scapegoats. Sometimes Asians are the scapegoats, or Hispanics. And we really have to tell that story, that we don't solve our problems by having scapegoats. I think that's an important lesson.
I suppose in some ways it's about not only embracing our differences, but embracing our similarities and realizing that many of our stories are the same.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, I think we're coming toward the end of our time together, unfortunately. And I want to bring our conversation back to a comment that you made about the book, which is it's about how we treat people and what is our responsibility for them. I can't help but notice that that's exactly what Lend a Hand is about, and at the core of our mission and at the core of our work. It's a grassroots organization founded on the sole purpose of helping our neighbors in need, and been doing that for 22 years. This book chat, and the subject matter of Holocaust are a perfect springboard to introduce our newest initiative, in which we're looking to lend a hand to Holocaust survivors in Long Island that are enduring unspeakable challenges. If anyone here is a Holocaust survivor who needs help, or know of one, or a donor who would like to support Holocaust survivors or others in need, please reach out to us. Our contact information can be found on our Lend a Hand website. We're so grateful, Meryl, for you, for your husband, Stuart, for your ongoing support of our organization, and for allowing us this opportunity to share your book and your perspectives. We're so proud of the acknowledgements that you've gotten, and the acknowledgements of the book, particularly in the few short weeks since it's become available. I can't wait to see what we have in store for you, for us. I wish you all the best. Lend a Hand wishes you all the best, and look forward to what's to come. We also look forward to seeing all of you at future Lend a Hand Project events. So thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, Meryl, and thank you, Lisa. And I want to thank everyone for being on this call. We hope you enjoyed it. And as Lisa said, this is just the beginning of a special series that we will be doing for fundraising, and we hope we can see you again in the future. Thank you, stay safe, and be well, and good night.
Thank you.